Stimulus Technologies is 30 years old. If you missed our previous episode, we dove into, what it was like for Nathan to start his business in his garage at 17. So be sure to check that out if you haven't. And today we're going to continue and we're going to talk a little bit more about what it's like to have been in business for 30 years and what success looks like.
You're listening to Stimulus Tech Talk, a conversation-based podcast created by Stimulus Technologies that covers a range of topics related to business and technology.
Welcome to Stimulus Tech Talk. I am Sherry Lipp, the marketing manager at Stimulus Technologies, and we are talking to Nathan Whitaker, the CEO of Stimulus Technologies. Hello, Nathan.
Hey, Sherry, and hello, everybody.
After 30 years in business, how does success look different to you now than it did when you were 17?
So when I started the company 30 years ago, I started it because I love technology and working with it. Like many people that start their businesses, I love the craft that I was doing. Love building computers, installing computers, building networks and environments for businesses. And I realized that success at that time for me was, the actual work I was doing, getting a computer built or seeing a network completed. And over time, I realized that success changed to seeing that technology help a business succeed, which is a slight tweak on the work that I was doing. Obviously, I enjoyed the technology side of it, but found out that I enjoyed more working with a business owner, working with an individual, working with a community on bringing technology to them that help them in their lives. And I don't know exactly when that shift changed for me. Somewhere along the way, I realized that we weren't serving technology, but we were serving people. And I found a love for helping people be successful through technology. Obviously, we're still a technology company and I love the technology aspects of it. But in the end, we're using technology to make people's lives better. And that's what I define success as today is that technology is what makes people's lives better, connects us to other parts of the world, connects us to other people, connects us to the communities in which we live, and gives people the access to and the ability to be more productive in their lives and have more enjoyment in what they're doing. And so that's a shift.
And so, what's something that was very important to you in business at 17 that you realized wasn't as important as you thought it was back then?
Oh, I didn't even know what I was doing at 17 years old, it's business back then. I was just really looking to, supplement and pay for my college tuition, and to supplement the life that I was wanting to build. Also, what was really important to me is seeing advancements in technology. I wanted to be part of that, and that was, you know, big part of what we were doing is, using bleeding edge technology. I was really into Linux, which is why we have a penguin as a logo, and really seeing, open source technologies be available to businesses to help them grow. And so, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed, working on the technology, but business wise, it was really about the technology, not about, the business itself. And I had to change that, certainly over the years because the business aspect of running a business is essential. I've had to learn so much since the beginning. But I still love the technology. When I get to dive into tech, it it brings me joy. But I certainly have shifted my mindset on it.
And what keeps you motivated after all this time?
30 years is a long time. I often say that I'm unemployable, at this point. Nobody would want me to work for 'em because, 30 years of doing your own thing is a long time. What keeps me motivated is, just seeing the business grow and seeing the ability that we have to impact people's lives, impact the community that we serve, impact the people that we work with, and work for the company, and seeing our customers and clients use technology successfully. So I, I'm always, riding a roller coaster of business and, setting a vision of where we're going, not a straight path or a straight line. Somebody posted a picture the other day as I was kind of frustrated one day of, what we expect is a straight linear line towards our goals, and what we end up with is a spaghetti graph of, the path that we take. And, that path is interesting to me. And if we can get through as a company and me as a leader get through that mess that we have to go through to get to the end goal, and I can see that successfully getting there, that's what keeps me motivated. So I am motivated by the challenges. It's, weird to say that, but I like overcoming obstacles and challenges and solving bigger problems. And that's what keeps me motivated every day.
I asked you, what's different from when you were 17, but what's one value that has never changed in the 30 years?
I think it's our first core value as a company, is driven to grow. I had that mindset early on, is, always be learning every day something new, something, that helps the company move forward, helps me move forward. And we've kept that as a core value, I think all along, is that growth mindset. And I truly believe that all of us individually and collectively have the ability to grow our capabilities and capacity, to do great work, and to be better, and that's just never changed.
And what's a real world piece of advice that you might give another 17-year-old who's contemplating starting their own business?
Well, I might first say don't do it. That's your button for punishment. But after that first joke, I do get a lot of people that come and ask me that whether they're 17 or 37 or 57, that they want to start their own business. And I certainly inform them of the challenges of it. It's not easy to operate a business. And it's one reason why, the majority of the businesses fell within 5 years, is because those challenges can sometimes be insurmountable to the business and the business owner. And luckily, we've been able to get past that, with 30 years. But I always feel like we're still in that 5 years. There's always going to be challenges um, that want to take the business down, whether it's economic, whether it's, a vendor, whether it's a client, whether it's a hacker, whatever it may be. There's somebody's waking up every day to try to put you out of business. And you have to be willing to fight against that every day of your life. I see it, in small businesses that are just a single entrepreneur to large enterprises, with thousands or tens of thousands of employees. There's somebody out there that, whether they intend to or not, is waking up every day to put you out of business. And you just have to be willing to fight for that. So, for a 17-year-old, I'd say, you're going to be fighting every day. If you enjoy the challenge of that, then go into business, because it's never going to be easy, but it's certainly worth it if you can overcome those difficulties.
Are there any challenges you experienced that you would have never really thought about when you first started?
Oh man. How long do we have, Sherry?
Everything.
No, again, I was naive at 17. I thought it was the biggest challenge was going to be, the technology side of things. I think realized early on that business was much more complicated than expected, whether it was, you know, doing taxes or submitting payroll data, or, and a lot of that back in the 90s, we were doing manually, or, we had a CPA or accountant that was helping us with that on the side. But, a lot of it was just, manual work. And then, most of the challenges that were unexpected were regulatory. You come along and, oh, you're supposed to be filing this form with the government, once a quarter, or, we have to do it this way. And and a lot of those things are government regulations that as a small business you don't realize exist. And it's unfortunate that they continue piling those on every year, that there's more things you have to do. I mean, last year, in 2024, they had these new regulations of these forms that we had to fill out of beneficial business ownership, and it was just something new that the government invented. Not a big deal, but it was just something that we had to do. So those are the challenges that really, you don't expect as a business owner. When you start your business, you think, "Oh, I'm just going to work on my craft. I'm going to deliver this service to our clients." And in the end, it's okay. You get to do that, and you get to do that every day. Great, and that's enjoyable. But you also have to do all this other stuff, and especially when you're small, it's on you as a business owner to do all that work. When you get a little larger, you build a team and they assist you with it. But initially, it's a challenge to do all those things. Um, and do them well. And the consequences for not doing them are pretty high. So, certainly, when you're dealing with government regulators, or you're dealing with, potentially the cybersecurity side of the business, which every business has to work through today, there's again somebody waking up every day trying to put you out of business, and that's the scary part of it.
When you hit those insurmountable challenges, or what seems like an insurmountable challenge, was there a singular moment like you hit something like that where you're like, how can I keep going with this, that kept you going?
I hit those often, actually. There's often times that something comes along that uh, that doesn't seem like there's a way to solve the problem. We're going through that right now with some changes in the internet services industry. The federal government released this opportunity for fiber optic providers and other providers to rebuild into rural communities high-speed broadband networks. And that money, $42 billion, could be spent to put Stimulus Technologies and other small internet providers out of business if we didn't take aggressive action. Luckily, we made some tough decisions in 2024 to put a plan together to go after these grants. We won some grants, and then all the rules changed, and those grants were rescinded, and we're having to rebid all of them. And man, when that news came out, it felt like 10,000-pound weight hit us, blindsided the company, that we had this direction we were going, this project we had won, literally had won it, and it got pulled out. And how do I get over that? How do I move beyond it? I have a core group of people, including a CEO coach and leadership team, that we work together, and I confide in them, and we try to work together to solve these bigger problems. Confide in my wife and talk to some family members too, from the personal side, and trying to understand it. And I take some time to contemplate, and I'm also religious. Take it to prayer and meditation, and that helps me get through it. I'll just share briefly. I mean, this is a kind of a personal story, and I often do this. And if there is something that I just really don't have a clear direction on, I take some time. So when this happened a couple of weeks ago, I took, wasn't expected, but I took some time to go to my temple and sit there and meditate and pray over what we should do and get some clarity. And I think, for me, that time away, to think, to talk to God, to go introspectively and come up with a new solution, a new way forward, has really helped me get through these challenges. So that's something, as leaders, we don't talk about a lot. We put on a business face, but for me, one of the biggest things that's helped me move forward is my faith, and that time to find a way forward personally through the challenge, and give me some foundation that's beyond just the business to know what to do. So It's just, another personal thing that I've done over the years is just think bigger than just the business. And it's helped me get through these challenges.
So as you're doing that as a leader of the company, how has your view of leadership changed over the years?
I guess I really didn't understand what leadership was at 17. I just share a funny experience when I served a mission for my church, speaking of religious, and I was called as a leader of this small group of missionaries. There was 12 of us. This was right, first off, and when I was in the missionary training center, and I made a mistake, and one of the other missionaries, came to me and said, I don't think you have any clue what it means to be a leader. And I told him, I said, I really don't. I'm 19 years old and I'm learning just like every one of us in here. So I've had to learn a lot about what leadership is. You know, I had an interesting conversation recently with one of our first employees who was a friend of mine and still is a really good friend of mine. And he was sharing some stories that really impacted him early on in business where I was kind of a jerk, and he remembers them pretty well. That I said some things to him that were what I expected a boss should be. That boss term, and maybe it was learned from seeing bosses that I had early on when I was a teenager in retail. I worked a couple of retail jobs and I thought that's what it meant, to tell people, oh, you have to stay until 5 o'clock, come hell or high water. You have to stay, through your entire shift, no matter what. Even if you showed up early, you didn't go to your lunch break, and I chewed him out for that. And even though, he had done really good work that day and completed everything he needed to do. There was some other things that he mentioned to me, and this was a couple of weeks ago as we were reminiscing about the business, that I really regret, and I apologized to him. So I initially thought that being a leader meant being a strict boss. And there's certainly times for that. If somebody is really doing things that they shouldn't do as a company, there are times to resolve that and be strict. But if everybody's doing the work that they need to be doing to move the company in the right direction, um, there's certainly some latitude that we should allow as managers of the business for that. Um, and then, the other thing I learned is there's a very distinct difference between boss, manager, and leader of the organization. And I guess I didn't understand that initially. And as the business has grown and my concept of leadership has changed to setting the strategy and direction of the company, making sure the company is living by its core values, setting the intention, where the company is going in 1, 3, 5, 10 years. That's what leadership is really focusing on where the company is going, which is very different than management, which is dealing with the day to day, or boss, which is that strict, you shall do this every day. And those are very distinct roles for an owner of a business. But somebody that's leading a company, leading an organization, should focus on those higher level things. And I've had to learn that over the years. Um, it's not easy because again, it's a big shift from what I think is played by bosses on TV, or maybe what you think, or what you experienced in different industries. But it's helped us grow the business as I've adapted and changed over the years.
And what do you want your employees to take away from their time working at Stimulus, whether it's a short time or a very long time?
More than anything is that we can give something to them to help their lives be better. And beyond a paycheck. I mean, that the paycheck is the default. But if they can grow individually in some way, if we can make a meaningful difference to them, if we can help build their careers or help them see joy in serving our clients and customers, that's what I want for them. Some of my proudest moments for employees is when they've come to Stimulus early on in their careers, and we've given them something that they couldn't have experienced elsewhere and set them on the path, whether it's at Stimulus or whether it's at another organization. I hate to see great employees go, but sometimes, we don't have a place for where they're going in their career, and see them achieve that makes me really happy. Certainly want the greatest employees to stay with us. And we have had some that have left, for a certain period of time and come back and work for us. And, that says a lot to me is, somebody that really has learned from us, maybe exceeded what they can do for us. And then when we have a position or availability, they come back and say, that's great. I'd like to take that on. So that's that's, I think, the best thing that we can get back from an employee. But, just growth in their lives is beyond just the paycheck every day. That's what I'm hoping for.
And so we've talked a lot about core values here and in some of the other episodes. How do you keep that feeling, that hometown, local feeling as you expand out of areas? I mean, you live in Las Vegas, so you know that. How do you keep that local feeling as you expand?
I think it's important to have leadership and people in the communities that we serve. What's I think well for us is, retaining, if we've acquired a company, retaining as much of the staff as possible. It really helps with the continuity and feel like, there's no change to the organization. I do visit, the locations, and really try to understand what's going on in their communities, and that really helps me as the leader of the organization to, understand what they need. I meet weekly with most of the managers over the different locations to understand what's going on in their areas, and that again helps me. I mean, if we're at 70 employees today, if we're 700 or 7,000, that becomes more challenging to do personally. But I certainly want to still have that touch from me as a leader of the organization down to every part of the business, and really understand what's going on, not just numbers on a page or dashboards or KPIs, but really hear what's going on and understand. I try to get to know the communities. We've every place that we've gone, I've enjoyed learning about, and oftentimes it's a place that I enjoy visiting too. So that's been a big part of it. So I think it's worked so far. It might be more difficult as we get bigger, but it's something that I want to continue to do as a leader.
And final question, if you had not started Stimulus in your garage all that time ago, what do you think you would have done?
That's a good question. So, I stayed in Las Vegas to go to school at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, because we had Stimulus Technologies. I had some applications to other colleges down in Southern California, up in Utah, and it's a good potential that I would have, gone to a college somewhere else and gotten a job or done something for another company. More likely than not, I probably would be doing more software development today um, than I am. So I don't know. It's a good question. I've often thought about that. I probably would have moved away from Las Vegas. I think that would have been the biggest change. I would have liked to come back here. I think I really love Las Vegas. I love the community. I love where we're at. So yeah, I I would hope that I would have been in some type of leadership position in an organization. May have started something along the way. I have always coming up with kooky ideas of different things to do. Um, but I would have imagined that it would be more software development focused than what we're doing today, because that's what I went to school for, and probably would have continued doing more of that. But I have no regrets. I love I do love the company, and just excited for the future of the company. So it's hard to think back that way, because it you know happy with the decision and direction we've gone.
Right. All right. Well, thanks, Nathan. Very, very interesting and cool to dive down a little more personal into your journey.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. Good questions. I appreciate it.
Right. Thanks, everybody. And be sure to check out part 1 if you have not already.